Section 3 of The Story of the Trapper by Agnes Christina Laut. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ted Leinhardt. Chapter 3. The Nor'westers' Coup. It had been decided in council at Fort William that the company should send the Isaac Todd to the Columbia River, where the Americans had established Astoria, and that a party should proceed from Fort William overland to meet the ship on the coast, wrote MacDonald of Garth, a Northwest partner, for the perusal of his children. This was decided at the Northwest Council of 1812, held annually on the shores of Lake Superior. It was just a year from the time that Thompson had discovered the American fort in the hands of former Nor'westers. At this meeting, Thompson's report must have been read. The overland party was to be led by the two partners, John George McTavish and Alexander Henry, the sea expedition on the Isaac Todd by Donald McTavish, who had actually been appointed governor of the American fort in anticipation of victory. On the Isaac Todd also went MacDonald of Garth. The overland expedition was to thread that labyrinth of waterways connecting Lake Superior and the Saskatchewan, thence across the plains to Athabasca, over the northern Rockies, past Jasper House, through Yellowhead Pass, and down half the length of the Columbia through Kootenay Plains to Astoria. One has only to recall the roaring canyons of the northern Rockies, with their sheer cataracts and bottomless precipices, to realize how much more hazardous this route was than that followed by Hunt from St. Louis to Astoria. Hunt had to cross only the plains and the width of the Rockies. The Nor'westers not only did this, but passed down the middle of the Rockies for nearly 1,000 miles. Before doubling the Horn, the Isaac Todd was to sail from Quebec to England for convoy of a warship. The Nor'westers' naive assurance of victory was only exceeded by their utter indifference to danger, difficulty, and distance in the attainment of an end. In view of the terror which the Isaac Todd was alleged to have inspired in McDougall's mind, it is interesting to know what the Nor'westers thought of their ship. Quote, "A 20-gun letter of marque with a mongrel crew," end quote, writes MacDonald of Garth. Quote, "A miserable sailor with a miserable commander and a rascally crew," end quote. On the way out, MacDonald transferred to the British convoy Raccoon, leaving the frisky old Governor McTavish with his gay barmaid Jane drinking pottle deep on the Isaac Todd, where the rightly disgusted captain was not on speaking terms with His Excellency. Quote, "We were nearly 6 weeks before we could double Cape Horn, and were driven halfway to the Cape of Good Hope. At last doubled the Cape under topsails, the deck one sheet of ice for 6 weeks, our sails one frozen sheet, lost sight of the Isaac Todd in a gale," end quote, wrote MacDonald on the Raccoon. It will be remembered that Hunt's overlanders arrived at Astoria months after the Pacific Company's ship. Such swift coasters of the wilderness were the Nor'westers, this overland party came sweeping down the Columbia, 10 canoes strong, hale, hearty, singing as they paddled, a month before the Raccoon had come, 6 months before their own ship, the Isaac Todd. And what did McDougall do? Threw open his gates in welcome, let an army of 80 rivals camp under shelter of his fort guns, demeaned himself into a pusillanimous little running fetch and carry at the beck of the Nor'westers, instead of keeping sternly inside his fort, starving rivals into surrender, or training his cannon upon them if they did not decamp. Alexander Henry, the partner at the head of these dauntless Nor'westers, says their provisions were nearly all gone. But oh, the bragging voyageurs told those quaking Astorians terrible things of what the Isaac Todd would do. There were to be British convoys and captures and prize money and prisoners of war carried off to St. Anne alone knew where. The American-born scorned these exaggerated yarns, knowing their purpose, but not so MacDougall. All his pot-valiant courage sank at the thought of the Isaac Todd, and when the campers ran up a British flag, he forbade the display of American colors above Astoria. The end of it was that he sold out Mr. Astor's interests at 40 cents on the dollar, probably salving his conscience with the excuse that he had saved that percentage of property from capture by the Raccoon. At the end of November, a large ship was sighted standing in over the bar with all sails spread, but no ensign out. 3 shots were fired from Astoria. There was no answer. What if this were the long-lost Mr. Hunt coming back from Alaskan trade on the Beaver? The doughty Nor'westers hastily packed their furs, 92 bales in all, and sent their voyageurs scampering upstream to hide and await a signal. But MacDougall was equal to the emergency. He launched out for the ship, prepared to be an American if it were the Beaver with Mr. Hunt, a Nor'wester if it were the Raccoon with a company partner. It was the Raccoon, and the British captain addressed the Astorians in words that have become historic. "Is this the fort I've heard so much about? D-blank me, I could batter it down in 2 hours with a 4-pounder. 2 weeks later, the Union Jack was hoisted above Astoria, with traders and Marines drawn up under arms to fire a volley. A bottle of Madeira was broken against the flagstaff. The country pronounced a British possession by the captain, cheers given, and 11 guns fired from the bastions. At this stage, all accounts, particularly American accounts, have rung down the curtain on the catastrophe, leaving the Nor'westers intoxicated with success. But another act was to complete the disasters of Astoria, for the very excess of intoxication brought swift judgment on the reveling Nor'westers. The Raccoon left on the last day of 1813. MacDougall had been appointed partner in the Northwest Company, and the other Canadians re-engaged under their own flag. When Hunt at last arrived in the Peddler, which he had chartered after the wreck of Mr. Astor's third vessel, the Lark, it was too late to do more than carry away those Americans still loyal to Mr. Astor. Farnham was left at Kamchatka, whence he made his way to Europe. The others were captured off California, and they afterwards scattered to all parts of the world. Early in April 1814, a brigade of Nor'westers, led by MacDonald of Garth and the younger McTavish, set out for the long journey across the mountains and prairie to the company's headquarters at Port William. In the flotilla of 10 canoes went many of the old Astorians. 2 weeks afterward came the belated Isaac Todd, with the Nor'westers' white flag at its foretop and the dissolute old Governor McTavish holding a high carnival of riot in the cabin. No darker picture exists than that of Astoria, or Fort George, as the British called it, under Governor McTavish's regime. The picture is from the hand of a Northwest partner himself. Quote, "Not in bed till 2 a.m., the gentlemen and the crew all drunk. Famous fellows for grog they are. Diced for articles belonging to Mr. M." End quote. Alexander Henry had written when the Raccoon was in port, and now, under Governor McTavish's vicious example, every pretense to decency was discarded. Avec les loups il faut hurler was a common saying among Nor'westers, and perhaps that very assimilation to the native races which contributed so much to success also contributed to the traders' undoing. White men and Indians vied with each other in mutual debasement. Chinook and Saxon and Frenchman alike lay on the sand, sodden with corruption, and if one died from carousals, companions weighted neck and feet with stones and pushed the corpse into the river. Quarrels broke out between the wassailing governor and the other partners. Emboldened, the underlings and hangers-on indulged in all sorts of theft. All the gentlemen were intoxicated, writes one who was present. 7 hours rowing 1 mile, innocently states the record of another day, the tide running 7 feet high past the fort. The spring rains had ceased. Mountain peaks emerged from the empurpled horizon in domes of opal above the clouds, and the Columbia was running its annual mill race of spring floods, waters milky from the silt of countless glaciers and turbulent from the rush of 1,000 cataracts. Governor McTavish and Alexander Henry had embarked with 6 voyageurs to cross the river. A blustering wind caught the sail. A tidal wave pitched amidships. The craft filled and sank within sight of the fort. So perished the conquerors of Astoria. End of section 3.